So if you want to say something, you can unmute your mic and then you speak. So on the first question, which is question number E, is it gonna be direct, inverse, or neither of the proportions? Which one is gonna be? Okay, let me remind you of what we have covered yesterday, and then you will try to answer question number F, G, and H. So on question number G, we first have to check the pattern we have for X. So for X, we are given 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, of which is having a constant quotient. So this is having a what? A constant quotient. And it's increasing if you see. If you check, we're having 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, of which these are numbers which are what? Which are increasing. Are we all together with regard to that explanation I've given just now? So I believe you can all see that these numbers are having constant proportion of which is increasing. Then now let's check for Y. What is happening with Y? So for Y, we are given numbers given as 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, of which these numbers are also what? They are also increasing. So now we should be able to conclude about the proportion we have here. So if X is increasing and Y is increasing, what can we say about the proportion? Is it going to be direct, inverse, or neither of the proportion? Which one is going to be in this case? So if you know the answer, you can unmute yourself and then talk, or you write on the chat. I can be able to see the answers you provide on the chat. So what is the answer for question number E? Maramba, what do you think is the answer? What do you think is going to be the answer for question number E?
Inverse proportion.
Okay, nice try. So now, she said it is going to be inverse proportion. So let's check what do we know about the inverse proportion, and also I will also do for direct proportion, so that we get to the conclusion of what we have there. So the inverse proportion applies when the product of these numbers are the same. So if you find the product of X and Y, and then you get the same answer, therefore you can conclude that you have a direct proportion, the inverse proportion. And then again, you can check the inverse proportion. If X is increasing and Y is decreasing, then with that you can also be able to conclude that you have the what? The inverse proportion. So let me write these points here so that you can be able to know when do we say it's inverse proportion and when do we say it's direct proportion. So now the first important point which you must take note of is that when you multiply all the values we have on X and the values we have on Y, these values, they must give you the same number. For example, if you multiply 12 and 6, you multiply 13 and 7, multiply 14 and 8, 15 and 9, they must give you the same answer. That's when we say it's having a constant product. Therefore, that will give you the inverse proportion. And then the second one, the second point of which you can use to check if it's having inverse proportion, it's when if X increases and Y decreases. That's another thing which you can use to check if it's inverse proportion. Or if X is decreasing and Y increasing. So these are the three important points which you must look for if you want to conclude about the inverse proportion. The product of XY, they must be constant. If X increases, then Y must be decreasing in that case. Or the last point is when if X decreases, it's a must that now Y must be what? Must be increasing. So let's look for all these points and check if indeed this first question it satisfies these three conditions we have here. Now I believe you all have calculators with you then. So now let's first check the product of these two. So if we find the product of 12 and 6, what do you get? I'm gonna write those values below Y there so that we check about the Y, the product of X and Y. So if we find this product 12 multiplied by 6, what do you get?
72.
It gives you the answer of what?
72.
72. And then product of 13 and 7, what do you get when you put that into your calculators?
91.
91. And then 14 and 8, when you multiply them together, you get what?
112.
112. And then 15 and 9?
135.
135. And then the last one, what do you get when you multiply 16 and 10?
160.
Is 160. Yes, definitely. Okay, then now let's check what we obtained here. We obtained several values of which they are all different. They are different. Do you see that?
Yes.
So these values, they are all different, which means it does not satisfy this condition for the inverse proportion. It does not satisfy the condition for the inverse proportion. So in other words, we can then say it's not inversely proportional. So, but again, let's test the second condition because indeed, if it is inverse proportion, it must meet all the conditions. Now, let's check the second condition. The second condition, it says, if X increases, then Y is a must that Y must what? Must decrease. Let's look for that and see what's happening here. For the X, are these values of X increasing or decreasing?
Increasing.
Are increasing, yes, exactly. And then the values of Y, are they increasing or decreasing? They are increasing. You see that in this case, we're having X which are increasing and the Y which are increasing. So it means it cannot be what? It cannot be inversely proportional. Now, we then have to check for the next one, which is direct proportion or directly proportion. We usually use directly, but in your book they're using direct, which is okay. So let's use direct proportion. Okay, now for direct proportion, we just have to check for the constant quotient. We must have constant quotient. So let's check for the constant quotient here. So the constant quotient, you check them by subtracting these values we're given here. What is 13 minus 12? It must give you the same number for when you subtract the values for X and when you subtract the values for Y. So here when we subtract 13 and 12, what do you get?
1.
You get a 1. Same here with 14, you will see if you subtract 14 and 13, you're gonna get a 1. 15 and 14, you're gonna get a 1. 16 and 15, you're gonna get a 1. So let's quickly do for the Y. For the Y, you do the same. We subtract these values. You subtract 7 and 6, of which again is gonna give you a 1. 8 and 7 is gonna give you a 1. And then 9 and 8, 1. 10 and 9, it's going to be 1. So it means it satisfies the first condition for for the direct proportion. Let me write this condition in detail. So we must have what is called constant quotient. Constant quotient, of which I showed you just now. This is how we find the constant quotient. You subtract these values, of which when you subtract, they must give you the same number. They must give you the same number. Okay, and now let's go to the second condition. The second condition is that if x increases, then y must increase. That is the second condition. The third condition is that if y increases, let's use decrease in this case. So if it decreases, then the y must what? Must decrease. That is for the direct proportion. You check for the constant quotient, and then from there you check if x increases, y must increase. If y decreases, I mean if x decreases, then y must what? Must also decrease. So now let's check these three conditions on this first question here. So now already we checked that we are having constant quotient here because we have one throughout when we subtract the values. Let's check the second condition, of which we are told if x increases, then y must increase. Does this table miss this second condition we have there?
Yes.
It does. Why? Because x is what? Is increasing, and y is what? Is increasing. Therefore, it means the what? The second condition. So now let's go back to the conclusion. What would be the conclusion for the first question? Is it direct proportion or inverse proportion?
Direct proportion.
Is direct proportion. Yes, very true. So it's very important for you to remember the condition. You must remember this condition for the inverse proportion and also for the direct proportion. Let's quickly go to question number F. So question number F, we check again if it is inverse proportion or direct proportion or neither. So now tell me, before I do any explanation, I would like you to try and find out the answer for question number F. What do you think is about the proportion for question number F? Is it inverse, direct, or neither? What do you think will be question number F? Is it inverse proportion or direct proportion? Okay, I know this is a bit complex, but let me try to do with you again so that you see how we attend to this question. But at the end, you are the ones who are supposed to give me the answer of this question. Tell me about the x there. Is this x having a constant quotient? Do we have a constant quotient for the values of x?
I want a constant.
Do we have constant quotient for the values of x? I believe you remember how we find the constant quotient, né? So do we have constant quotient for the values of x? Do we have constant quotient for the values of x here?
No.
We don't have. Very true. There is no constant quotient for this. So I believe you remember how we find the constant quotient. Subtract this with that, this with this. So if they are not having the same values, therefore you conclude that it's not having the what? The constant quotient. So without even going any further, this direct proportion is what? Is out. Né? Can we try for the inverse proportion? Can we do the inverse proportion together?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now, before we do it, can you remind me about the first condition for the inverse proportion? What are we supposed to find if we want to check for the inverse proportion?
If X increases,
And
What do we have to do?
XY constant.
Yes, we need to find the product of X and Y, né?
Yes.
Of which, if they are the same, you then can conclude that it's having a constant product in that case. So let's check if indeed, if we multiply X and Y, we get the same values here. So the multiplication of X and Y, we're going to multiply 0.5 and 12. What do we get when we multiply 0.5 and 12?
6.
We get a 6. And then what's the multiplication of these values here? The second values there of X and Y, we get a 6. And then for the next one,
6.
and then here,
6.
and then on the last one, what is 24 times
6.
0? We get a 6. Yes, very true. Do you see that it qualifies the first condition for the inverse proportion?
Yes.
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 It qualifies the first condition for the inverse proportion. But that does not give you a go ahead to conclude that it's inverse proportion. So you need to go further and check if when X increases, does Y decreases? If X decreases, does Y increases in that case? So let's check together. These values of X were given here. Are they increasing or decreasing?
Increasing.
They are
Increasing.
Yes, very true. So the values of X were given here, they are what? They're increasing. And then the values of Y, are they increasing or decreasing?
Decreasing.
They are decreasing. Yes, it's very, very important for you to take note of this. It will help you to answer some questions which you gave me as homeworks again. We are still going to attend to those questions. So you can see this question means the second condition there. If X increases, then Y must what? Must decrease. So you can conclude about the F. So now tell me, is F direct proportion or inverse proportion?
Inverse proportion.
Is inverse, yes. This is inverse proportion. Is inverse proportion. Okay, now before we go further, is there anyone who still have a problem with identifying about the inverse proportion and about the direct proportion?
Yes, me.
Okay, tell me where you don't understand so that I can explain that part clearly about from what you have covered up to so far. Where do you feel you don't understand so that I can explain that part clearly?
Direct proportion.
The direct proportion, eh?
Yes.
Okay, now I'm going to explain about the direct proportion again. So now for the direct proportion, we have to check if we want to find out if the table you are given is having direct proportion or inverse proportion or neither. For direct proportion, we need to check these three conditions. So the first condition is that we need to check if the table we are given have constant quotient. We need to check if the table given is having a constant quotient. What are the constant quotient? Let's go to the table. I'll give an example by the tables we are given. I'll give an example of the first table that we have done already. Let's use this one for the direct proportion. So the constant quotient, you get it by subtracting the values that are given there. You subtract these values which are given. So you subtract 13 and 12, 14 and 13, 15 and 14, 16 and 15. So if you are getting the same difference for all these values, and that must apply also for y. If you subtract 7 and 6, 8 and 7, 9 and 8, 10 and 9, you must get the same values. So, but in some cases, you may find that the difference you obtained for x is different with the difference you get for y. That doesn't matter. As long as the difference for y is the same and the difference for x is what? Is the same. That's the first condition for the what? For the direct proportion. Did you understand that explanation I gave just now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, then now let's go to the second one. The second condition which you must check is about the increases and decreases of x and y. So for the direct proportion, it says that if x is increasing, if these values of x are increasing, then it's a must that the values of y must also be what? Be increasing. So if they decreases, then you must know there are problems there. So both the values of x and the values of y must what? Must increase. Are we all together with that explanation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and then the last one, the last condition there, it says if x is decreasing, if you find that the values of x are decreasing, it's a must that the values of y must also be what? Must also be decreasing. That is how you check for the what? For the direct proportion. Are we all together?
Yes.
Okay, so I've given you enough explanation about the direct proportion and the inverse proportion. So I would like you to test your skill with regards to what I've explained to you already. What do you think will be, what proportion do you think will be table number G? Will this be direct proportion, inverse proportion, or neither? Try to answer for that one. Question number G.
Direct.
Direct proportion.
Is direct.
Direct.
Okay, let's test if indeed it's direct. So your claim is that we are going to have direct proportion. So now let's check if indeed it's going to be a direct proportion here. We first have to subtract the values and see if they're the same, the values for x and also the values for y. So 3 minus 2, it's 1. 4 minus 3, it's 1. 5 minus 4, it's 1. 6 minus 5 is 1. Therefore, with x, we are satisfied. Let's go for 1. If we subtract 9 and 4, what do we obtain?
5.
It's a 5. If we subtract 16 and 9, what do we get?
5. 5.
Yes. 5.
What is it?
7.
We get a 7. If we subtract 25 and 16,
9.
9.
we get a 9. And then for the last one, 36 and
10.
we get what?
11.
11, yes. So now, with x, we are satisfied, but are we satisfied with the y?
No.
We are not satisfied with the y. So, but as I've told you before, we cannot make a conclusion by checking the difference only. We need to go further than that. We need to check for the second condition, which say if x increases, then y must increase. If x decreases, then y must what? Must decrease. So let's check if that condition is met. Is x increasing or decreasing?
Sorry.
Is the values of x increasing or decreasing?
Increasing.
They are increasing. It's very true. So the values of x were given here, they are increasing. And then let's check for the values of y. Are the values of y increasing or decreasing?
Increasing.
They are also what? Increasing. So it means this question, it satisfies the condition. It satisfies the condition for direct proportion.
The
The second
second.
condition for the direct proportion. If x increases, then y must what? Must increase. So it satisfies. So you don't have to rush in making conclusion about taking the difference here. So in other words, it satisfied two conditions out of three. It satisfied the constant quotient for x, but it does not satisfy the constant quotient for y. And it also satisfies the second, which say if x increases, y must increase in that case. So we can conclude about that because it satisfies the two conditions. Even though we know it's not satisfying the second condition there about taking the difference. Because if I explain this further, you will see that there's a pattern. There's a pattern in this one, but it's something which I think if I explain to you, it's going to be too complex. But let me explain to you that if you check the difference between 5 and 7, you're going to obtain a 2. The difference between 7 and 9, you're going to obtain a 2. The difference between 9 and 11, you're going to obtain a 2. So in other words, there's a pattern on this one. It's just that this pattern, you don't just get it by taking the difference there. So you need to go further than that. But because it met the two conditions I gave you before, so you check the difference here, and you also check if x is increasing and the y is increasing. You can be able to conclude that it's having what is called the direct proportion. So I know this question is a bit complex, but if you did not understand it, let me know. I'll try to explain it again. Okay, can you try question number H? What do you think will be the proportion on table number H? Is it increasing or decreasing? Or, I mean, is it inverse or a direct proportion?
Number 8.
Number H.
Direct.
It's
Is
direct.
direct. Yes. This one is obvious. I believe all of you were able to get this right because it's an obvious question. So, because if you check x are increasing and y are increasing in this case, if you check the difference between the values for x and the difference between the values of y, you may get the same answer. Okay, let me emphasize again on question number G because this was the complicated one. It qualifies to be the direct proportion, but again, they may also give you a mark if you write neither, because it does not really satisfy all the conditions for the conditions of the direct and the condition for the inverse. So here on question number G, let me emphasize that if you write direct or you write neither, they can give you a mark. You are not at a level where you can explain the direct proportion for this further. So if you write neither, they can give you a mark for that. Okay, are we all together with regard to the first 4 questions I've covered with you? Is there anyone who did not understand some of the questions there I covered with you just now?
No.
You are all fine, eh?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Which other questions did you say are part of the homework you're given from school?
1 and 2 from activity 1.7.
Okay, under activity 1.7. Okay. Let me check the questions. I'm now rubbing this off so that we do the remaining questions. Okay, you said other questions for homework is activity or exercise 1.4. Question number what?
1 and 2.
Question number 1. So we'll start with question number 1, which we are given the number of people which we're given 12, 15, 20, 30, and 40. And then here we're also given number of days. The food last. Okay, we're given the value of 40, the given of 32, A, B, and C. Okay, now let me read the question. The question says, the time that a certain amount of food lasts depends on the number of people eating it. Okay, the question in this exercise, the following table represent example of direct or inverse proportion. Write down the constant quotient if the question involves direct proportion and use it to find the unknown values in the table. Write down the constant product if the question involves inverse proportion and use it to find unknown values. Okay, now again, on this question, we need to first check the inverse and the direct proportion. And after getting the inverse and direct proportion, it's when we will go further and look for the unknowns, the unknown A, B, and what, and C. Are we all together with regard to that?
Yes.
Okay, then now let's check. Before we get the values of A, B, and C, can you tell me, on this table, do we have a direct proportion or inverse proportion?
Inverse.
Okay, we have inverse proportion. Let's check if indeed we have inverse proportion here. The values of number of people here, are they increasing or decreasing?
Increasing.
They are increasing. And then the number of days the food lasts, are the number of days the food lasts increasing or decreasing?
Decreasing.
They are decreasing, yes. So now that is a good sign of which you can then conclude that we have what is called the inverse proportion. So you are right, we're going to have inverse proportion here. Why? Because the number of people increases while the number of days the food lasts are what? Are increasing. And that is obvious. That is a very obvious case. If the number of people who are eating the food is increasing, the number of food that is reserved for these people, they will be decreasing because many people, they will be what? They will be eating those food. Yes. Are we clear with regard to that question?
Yes.
Okay, so we have answered the first part of the question. So it's inverse proportion, of which I believe you now know the reasons why we say it's inverse proportion. So now the next thing is to look for the values of A, B, and what? And C. Are we all together with regard to that?
Yes.
Okay, then now let's check if it is inverse proportion. If it is inverse proportion, how do we get the constant product? The constant product is get by multiplying 12 and 40, of which when you multiply 12 and 40, what do you get?
We get 480.
480. And then here, what is 15 and 32?
480.
You see, we're getting the same value. we have to get 480 next.
Mm.
So it means even on these ones, when you multiply them together, you must get the value of what?
480.
480. Are we all together?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. This meeting is going to end in 1 minute. Make sure when it ends, you log in again.
Yes.
Yes. Make sure you log in again. Let me finish the explanation of this in the next meeting because we are only left with a minute there.